Well, under the presidential system, the National Assembly provides checks and balances to the operations of the executive arm of government. But in the context of Nigeria, the check has brought conflicts leading to delays in the process of governance. Also discuss the key arms of government, or this key arm of government, in relation to its function as a check on the government and lawmaking body. I'm being joined now by legal practitioner Mr. Eze Onyechere from our studios in Abuja. Mr. Onyechere, thank you so much for joining us on the News at 10.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you.
Well, let's look at the National Assembly. How do you rate the performance in terms of lawmaking as well as their conduct?
Well, if you're talking about 50 years, about the years since we got independence, you're talking about a long period of time. But I will first of all say that you look at what the legislature is usually elected to do. We are talking about lawmaking, we are talking about oversight, we are talking about checks and balances, we are talking about representation. And if you look at the oaths the lawmakers have sworn to, in terms of protecting the sovereignty, integrity, solidarity, well-being and prosperity of the nation, and talking about the fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy, you will see that it is a mix of the good and the ugly. So in essence, there's no way a government can be succeeding without the legislature succeeding. There's also no way the government can be failing, and the legislature will also not be failing. So concretely, if we look at the period, particularly between 1999 and date, we find a situation where the poverty level has been increasing. We find a situation where the standard of living of Nigerians have been diminishing. We also find a situation where the government is holding the people more in contempt. So if the legislature has been doing their duties, we wouldn't have had the situation we have today. And from 2010 to the present day, when we have a situation where the budget of the legislature is no longer published, we are dealing with a situation of a constant 150 billion naira every year. I have the details of the remuneration of what the National Assembly members should earn right in front of me here.
Yes,
at the best or at the most.
Mr. Onyechere, we'll go into that in just a few minutes, the remuneration of the lawmakers. But first of all, let's look at their duties. How well have they been checking the government? Because that's one of their roles, isn't it?
Yeah, when you talk about checks and balances, you find a situation where they've been doing a lot of probes. They will be passing a lot of resolutions, but they've not been able to put their feet down to ensure that this is enforced. And this is the difference between them and legislatures all over the world. You have the American Congress that says, well, we shut down government, we are not passing a budget, and the government is actually shut down as we speak today. This is a National Assembly that says no money to Securities and Exchange Commission. I don't agree with them in terms of why they had to shut down the Securities and Exchange Commission, but that commission is still functioning. That's a clear example of how effective they have been. They talk about approving budgets, and after approving budgets, what exactly do Nigerians get out of the budget? So these are the questions that you have to resolve for you to be able to get at the performance of the legislature. So in essence, I'm saying that the legislature has not actually fulfilled the obligations and the role that Nigerians expect of them.
You mentioned not passing the budget on time or debating on the budget for longer than necessary. Would you say the legislatures or the lawmakers are what's the word to use now? Would you say that they are becoming a bit more powerful than the president in trying to hold us back? I mean, if they're having a hard time, or if they're debating for so long on the budgets, it means that they probably see themselves at par with the government. There's been a lot of tension between lawmakers and the president, and eventually they come to a compromise.
Now, the tension between the executive and legislature is inbuilt in every presidential system of governance, and where you have the doctrine of checks and balances. What I'm saying in essence is that the legislature is a hallmark of democracy, because as you say, the military always removes the legislature, they suspend them. You have the executive and the legislature rolled in one. The judiciary will be there, although they are blowing muted trumpets. So in essence, the legislature, if they've been living up to their role, we will have had a budget calendar by now, which says this is the time the executive should bring the budget, and this is also the time that we should finish the deliberation on it. And these are the things that should be done from time to time, and we get the report so that we can report back to our constituents. Because the legislature has failed in this assignment, that's why we have the situation we have today. If the legislature behaves well in terms of being the guardian angels of democracy, the executive will be forced to sit up. And the judiciary will also be forced to sit up.
You wanted to say something about the remuneration of lawmakers.
Yes, I was saying that I have the remuneration. Yeah, I have the remuneration right here before me. It's not more than 30 million naira a year for the senators and the honorable members in the House of Reps. If you multiply that figure with about 400 and something they are, you wouldn't get the big money they're earning today. You will get between 20 and 30 billion dollars at the most, 30 billion naira at the most. And by the time you double that for their, other part of the recurrent expenditure in terms of what they use for their overheads and everything, you'll be talking of 40, 50, at the most 60 billion. So what we have today is a legislature that does not justify the amount of money it takes away from the budget. And we have people who don't recognize their position in society who are talking about they are taking 1 or 2% out of the national till, as if to say we should share the money between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary for us to come to a compromise. So we have a legislature that is taking a disproportionate part of the resources we need for national development. And they're insisting on it because they're not doing their duty. If they're checking the executive, who may be stealing money from national coffers, and then they're checking the judiciary, they will now properly know that they don't need to take more than about 50% of their currently taking to be able to perform the assignments very responsibly. So we have a legislature that is holding down development, and they're not doing their job very well. They are overpaid.
Mr. Onyechere, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on the News at 10. I was just speaking to Mr. Eze Onyechere, a legal practitioner, and he was talking about the National Assembly and their duties and roles as checks on the government.